Hi, I'm Phoebe Roberts. I'm the creator of the Mrs. Hawking series, and I just wanted to talk a little bit today about how we went about incorporating Jack the Ripper into our newest release, Mrs. Hawking Part 6, Fallen Women. It's really easy to see why Jack the Ripper is such a common and popular inclusion when people want to tell Victorian mysteries or capers or even supernatural stories. Um, he's one of the most famous serial killers of all time, and the case has never been definitively solved and probably never will be, given how long ago it's been and how many answers that we'll never be able to find. Um, so there's a lot of room for artists to put their own interpretations into those gaps. Sometimes stories will attempt to identify or come up with an identity for the Ripper on their own, like they'll say he was some particular historical figure like William Gull or Prince Albert Victor or Walter Sickert, or many of those popular theories. There's people who again, choose to take a more supernatural bent and make him a demon or a monster of some kind, or the result of some, use of magic to create somebody that dangerous who never got caught. Some people really like to go against the grain and speculate kind of widely, like, what if Jack the Ripper was actually a woman or something like that. I've seen a lot of these stories and been influenced by a lot of these stories, but I knew we didn't quite want to go that direction with our particular interpretation. For us, it was important to remember the fact that this is something that really happened. While artists have the freedom to interpret the real world, it seemed really important to us that these are murders that really occurred. These were real lives that were actually taken. And if we were going to use them as fodder for drama, we had to take an approach that was kind of respectful to that fact. Like, it's very, very common in serial killer literature to put all of your focus on the killer and kind of hand wave or elide the reality or existence of the victims. And to have that get lost in sort of the lurid fascination that there is for, well, why do killers do this? How did they do it? How did this all happen? How are we going to catch him? And, I understand that appeal. That's, mysteries are about the unraveling, and capers are about the execution of plots. But since this was drawing on real history and involved real people's lives, we wanted to approach that with that in mind and not just sort of instrumentalize real people for the purposes of telling a fun story. We made a creative choice early on, particularly when we started our research, that if there was credible historical consensus on something about the time, we were going to go with it. The Mrs. Hawking stories are not strictly realistic. They're a little bit heightened in their, action qualities and such, but we want them to feel, anchored to reality and history. So if there was a clear historical consensus on some aspect of the case, we used it and incorporated it into our story. But if something was in question, as in people couldn't agree on what was actually the truth there, or if there was something that was completely unknown, we gave ourselves some license to experiment. That was kind of necessary to, include our fictional characters in this story at all. But this focus on reality was important to us in an effort to not just purely instrumentalize the victims and the things that happen to them for the purposes of entertainment. We did a fair bit of research, tried to sort of get a good sense of where the current scholarship, the current credible scholarship on Jack the Ripper is at this point. One of the most useful texts that we had was Helly Rubenhold's The Five, which focuses biographically on the canonical 5 victims that pretty much all reputable scholars agree were definitely killed by the same killer. This was really helpful in helping us conceive of who the victims were as people, which we wanted to bring to the fore in our interpretation. And it was really useful in sort of dismantling some of the popular mythology that surrounds the case. There was a lot of assumption at the time that has not really been eliminated with more understanding as time has gone on, that all the women who were murdered were sex workers. And some of them were. But it was sort of popularized in the understanding of the time because sex work was so stigmatized that it allowed people to comfort themselves that this monster was only going after quote-unquote bad women, that if you conducted yourself appropriately and with propriety, then you were not in danger, and to a certain extent that those women were killed because of something that they brought upon themselves with their lifestyle or their choices, which is really unfair. And while several of them were actually sex workers, the true thing that united all of these women was that they were the underclass of society. They were the ones with the least options, the fewest resources, the least social support, the ones who had been most let down by the societal systems of the time. And as is very common in many cases of serial killers, they target people like that because they are the least likely to be protected from that kind of violence, and they are the least likely to be missed when they are murdered. And so, the police put fewer resources into figuring out what happened to them. They have fewer people who want to advocate on their behalf, or who believe that their existence was worth standing up for, which makes it much easier for serial killers like the Ripper to get away with what they did. And we wanted to bring that understanding into the thematic fabric of fallen women. The Mrs. Hawking series has always been about confronting the failures of societal inequities, the ways that people of marginalized genders and ethnicities and classes in particular, the way that they suffer under these inadequate social structures. This has always been something we've been really interested in exploring. And the fact that Jack the Ripper speaks so strongly to the issues of social neglect of the time made it a really potent addition to the story that we're telling. And we felt like we had to make the story more about that than about sort of the lurid details of, a violent serial killer. So we wanted to make sure it was very clear that it was those failures and inadequacies of the social order that were allowing somebody like Jack the Ripper to continue on and take as many victims as he did, because there wasn't adequate support for women like those that he killed, that there were systems in place that might even protect somebody like him. And we felt like that was really, really important to focus on. And similarly, we wanted to do a little bit of work to humanize the victims and make them feel like real people rather than just like sacrifices to the telling of, a compelling narrative. Because the murders happened over a slightly extended period of time, we knew we couldn't depict everyone, but we chose to include what's generally considered by modern scholarship to be the final victim, Mary Jane Kelly, as a character in our play. And again, we did as much research as we could into what she was like as a person, although we are taking some creative liberties with how she sort of fits into our plot. But we wanted to, again, give some sense of the fact that she was a person, that she had agency, that she wasn't just a body that was destroyed. And that was sort of our attempt to honor her in a way that I think a lot of Jack the Ripper media does not attempt to. Unfortunately, because she is a victim, we were bound by the historical record that we knew, she would have to die in the course of our story. But for the time that she was present, we were really trying to round her out and make her human and give some depiction to the truth of who she was as a person, even though, we'll never actually know what her personality was like or the things she would have said or done. And we probably took some things that were truly liberties for the sake of telling a good story. But I hope that the version of her that we show, it comes through that it was an attempt to keep her human and to keep her from being a statistic or a cipher. Also, to that end, we make a point of repeating the names of the murdered women over and over again in hopes of emphasizing that they existed and shouldn't be forgotten, and also in hopes that the audience will remember them. Their names were Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly.
Don't forget.
And we do that multiple times to the exclusion of giving names in other cases where some people like to speculate as to what names might be. I won't say any more for fear of spoilers, because it keeps them sort of centered and present. And we hope that this is going to bring some of that focus back on them as people, as opposed to what often interests people more, the endless speculation on who the Ripper was and all the gritty details of what he did. We don't think that making art out of historical people's tragedy is an inherently disrespectful thing or inherently trivializes the stuff that happened to them. But I think you can if you forget that there were real people involved and you don't make some effort to honestly show them their lives and have consideration for what it meant to be borrowing from somebody's actual tragic experience. So we were doing our very best to be respectful. And the title we went with, full credit to Isaiah Plavnik for suggesting it to us, is Fallen Women. It puts the focus on them rather than on the person who did things to them. And I'm hoping that that comes across as unique and meaningful in the version of this story that we're telling. And if that sounds interesting to you, you can catch Mrs. Hawking Part 6, Fallen Women, debuting here on our YouTube channel, at Mrs. Hawking, on May 10th.